Let's talk about compliance, because your vendor should provide that for you. It's one of the best advantages of using the cloud, if done properly, is that, the fact of the matter is just getting an application compliant is often more expensive than the hosting fees associated with the cloud fees. And we are seeing that. We're seeing a lot of cloud providers getting the basic certification, SAS 70, Type 2 done. We had an announcement that PCI, someone came out that they were the first with PCI. They're not, but you can get to PCI, HIPAA, CFR Part 11, European Safe Harbor, industry, ISO. They can all work in the cloud. The concern, I think, with those is understand what you're asking for, and then ask enough to not just say, I want to see that you're compliant, because SAS 70, for example, is one of those certifications that you do what you say you're going to do, and then you are audited on what you say you're going to do. It is not like PCI, which requires you to follow very strict rigor in how you do something. And the concern there is a lot of people say they're SAS 70, but they won't tell you how they do it. Right. They won't give you the audit. They won't show you how they accomplish that within the environment. And that is enough to ensure that you have your compliance covered, that I went to a SAS 70 provider, but not enough to ensure that they're actually doing it in a way you feel safe with their data. So one of the things that I highly recommend, if you are going out in depending on a cloud provider to be compliant within your environment, they should be transparent in how they are doing that. And in best case scenario, should actually give you copies under NDA, but copies of the reports and the audits that were done. It'd be like saying, for guys in the equivalent of what we're seeing a lot now in the cloud world is people saying, I'm SAS 70, but I won't see your report. That would be like, NTT walking out onto the New York Stock Exchange and saying, hey, by the way, we were audited this year, and it's been signed off, but you can't see the audits. That you need to understand what underlie that and what was actually written up in those audits and how they're doing that. I encourage you, if you want to secure your data, and it's critical, be aware of what actually got someone to that level of compliance in the environment. And you'll see more. We're seeing more and more pop in every day.
In my 10 rules of cloud computing, the number one is you can't sue a cloud, but you should inspect it. And that's what he's saying. You really got to inspect what's going on, who your providers are, what are the issues, compliance, whatever. Are they complying with European standards, just US standards? They've got a whole new set of standards now in Britain, GBG 13, that you have to deal with. So you really have to do an inspection, because you don't have the back-end litigation capabilities. And just use your instincts. Just ask all the hard questions. And if they don't want to tell you the answer, have a nice day.
I guess that basically the cloud became so popular with all the flexibilities and the nice thing about it. And then now all the questions, well, in the early deployment of the cloud, really we wanted to show that how flexible, what's the capability that is. And we missed some of the things like a single, user account, password, just only single account allocated to the company, or some of the compliance issues. Now it's kind of coming along. And so I guess, Treb, you can mention about your particular cloud deployments that some of the...
Right, and so you can address those either, obviously, some of those areas of focus are things that you can get on the OpSource cloud. And there's also third-party tools out there as well. Some of these next generation companies like RightScale, for example, that adds that element of multi-user passwords and control into the environment. So there's two ways you can look to your vendor to solve those problems, or you can look for a third party who would solve on top. There are a number of very innovative solutions, for example, for encrypting data, because everything for most public cloud providers sits on the front end. So you want to have the data encrypted at all time. It's not natively encrypted. There are a number of software providers that will allow you to encrypt that data as you store it directly into those environments, so it travels encrypted from the minute it leaves your server. Is that the way? Is that ideal? Those opportunities, you can find that out. You can find companies that provide those either as a base level solution, or if you're already using a cloud environment and you're concerned, well, we're already in bed, we've already had this in place, then think about layering some of those next generation tools on top of it. I will say there are some distinct advantages from a security perspective on cloud environments, and this is one we were just talking about ahead of time. Mm-hmm. If you run an application out in the cloud right now, if you're running your own, so you put it in your own environment, you run it out into the cloud, you're out on your own. Someone decides to attack that application or attack you, you're out there trying to defend that. Well, the cloud has some mechanisms. We were talking about, you brought up what you guys had to learn, NTT America had to learn itself on DDoS and how to architect an environment around the DDoS in the cloud for the big guys like a Twitter and stuff. But how is that impacting the other people using those environments?
Sure. Yeah, certainly that from the network operators for a long time we've been doing, we know how to deal with, well, we feel like we know that we can deal with those DDoS and those kind of issues. And then, there's going to continue to be the threats for everybody. This is a different type of security from data securities or anything like that, but it is the threats to everybody. So that the providers like us, one of the advantages of the cloud provider is working typically closely with the network providers. So we talk to each other constantly when those attacks coming up, and we know how to filter those. If we don't, we figure out very quickly amongst the networks, amongst the network providers, and those kind of stuff. So you're right, Treb, that if you are your own environment, you feel like you are all alone versus that if you're on the cloud, I think you have a number of people supporting you. I think that you should take advantage of that area.
But it's interesting to note that the threat vectors have changed over the last 10, 15 years. I mean, it used to be Mafia Boy, some hacker on Thanksgiving Day attacking. Then it became gangs of commercials going after accounts. Now it's Facebook. And it's morphing into national organizations going against companies that they don't align with. So, there's Twitter who did some things that they thought were in a good thing for the world, and they're under attack continuously with DDoS attacks because of public policy issues.
Yeah.
So it's a very complex mosaic, and it's getting very difficult for enterprises to keep up. You almost have to go to a provider, unless you're like a Goldman Sachs or something like that. I don't know if anyone's from Goldman here, but then you got a fair amount of money you can throw at a problem. But the costs are just going up dramatically every year.
It's funny, we talk about how that's become more international and some of the battles you ended up battling, and it's hence we learned about the Facebook one. I also joke we have, for example, as a provider, we had to come up with a sophisticated, we've been constantly battling people. One of the great things about the cloud is you can spin up things in a couple hours, and you could think some of the things people might want to do with that type of resource. And so, and by the way, that's why they're stealing the Facebook accounts to get the credit card numbers so they can then set up phishing sites for those credit card numbers. And finally, after about 9 months, we've been going back and forth with all different things like callback confirmations and algorithms for checking, both through authorized and net. And the last, we came up with the one that finally solved our last most persistent problem for what we called Hank from Florida, because when he first registered, he registered as Hank from Florida, which is the really sophisticated algorithm is that we no longer take online signups from Vietnam. So if it comes in from a Vietnam IP address, it's told, please call us because we're not taking that unless we actually talk to you on the phone and can verify that you're a real person before we sign you up on that. I mean, it's just that kind of ongoing back and forth, give and take as to what they're trying to get out of these environments. For a corporate director, for corporate IT, I think the concern really circles back in around, though, is what are your employees putting up there? And it's almost impossible because without completely blocking access to the internet to them altogether, to keep them from doing it. So you've got to start thinking about ways that they can do it within the structure so you have some control over that. Because if it costs $5 and someone can spin up a server, think about that, about what someone in the sales department might be putting on that server that was spun up by their second-year intern out of San Jose State. That's the areas when you're thinking about data security in your corporation, you got to figure out how to enable those people to do what they want to do without clamping down, but still having some control over what's going on in the environments.
I mean, we're entering into the permanent data phase. Data used to be transient, used to be temporary. Now data exists forever. And that changes the entire way you look at things, your exposure, your liabilities. I mean, I tell my kids this all the time, stay off Facebook. Don't put that out there. It's never going to come off that picture, right? And so that's part of the issues. And then you have nationalism attacking that information.
I will give you one, if you're worried about legal protections on your data in the cloud, especially theft of intellectual property or corporate secrets. get a clear and comprehensive policy into your organization and for anybody who could be spinning those systems up about what is acceptable to put out there, what is not acceptable to put out there, and make it part of your human resources, not just the IT process and procedures. The reason being is if an individual steals data outside of the company, that doesn't make the company liable for the data theft. So, if that was the case, anybody who ever had an employee murder someone those companies would all be going to jail all the time. So someone who breaks the law outside of the confines of the organization. But if it is shown that you paid no attention in actually training or appropriately controlling how people handle that data, then the company is liable or can be found liable for that event. Otherwise, you can put that pressure back onto the individual. So make sure that if you're using cloud and you have that, you're very clear, or even if you're not using cloud and you don't think you're using cloud, you're very clear with the employees on what's acceptable to keep out on the internet, what's acceptable not to, and put that clearly into anybody who could touch it, which unfortunately is almost everybody now. So the company can show they had a clear and concise policy to protect itself legally.
Okay, I think we have
Question in the back?
1 minute, 2 minutes.
Talking about creating mini pods, mini data centers, and placing them all over the place. So, I have this prediction 10 years from now, the internet as we know it, that will not exist corporate-wise, to where every major corporation will have its own internet with the cost of bandwidth, the cost of materials, the cost of technology coming down. Corporations like P&G will have its own internet versus being a part of the rest of the internet, therefore having a more secure.
See, I'm glad you brought this because it's one of my favorite topics. No. It gets back to our earlier conversation on this. The internet is, we're talking today how, I have a 13-year-old daughter who is not particularly technical, good at math and stuff, but not a big technical person. She uses technology more than I did, and I was a founder of the computer club in 1984. I was a dork, right? And she uses technology more than I did every single day. And what you have to understand is the way this generation interacts with technology is completely different. And that having virtualization in your data center is not cloud. Cloud is three things for them. It's immediate availability They do a search and they get going. They don't wait for IT, they don't wait for things to get deployed, they do a search. It's ubiquitous access, it's anytime, any place they can get to that data. And it's the ability to share and collaborate and link that data in increasingly interesting ways with the people they want to work with. And that's the internet, that's what the cloud is. And that's what those users are going to look for in those environments. And of course now we get APIs where people are linking corporate data and the like. But to say I'm just going to create my own internet because the internet's scary doesn't solve any of those problems for the end customer. You've got to figure out how to secure the real public internet because that's what those users want to use. And with that, our time is up. We'll stay up here for anybody who'd like to come up after questions, but I got to go to Stephen real quick. Give us the drawing.
Right. Thank you.
It's a TREB with a B.
You want to
not
come
a
up,
V.
Stephen? All right,
Hey.
There we go. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.